All right. So we're here today to talk about pull requests. This is a talk for developers and people who want to be developers, presumably. Although if you want to see how the sausage goes, enjoy. But we're here today to talk about pull requests and why we use them, and what the responsibilities are of the submitter and the reviewer, and how to be nice to each other when you're doing through that review process collaboratively, and a few case studies about things. My name is Greg Farnum. I was the first Ceph tech lead on the Ceph project, and I'm now an engineering manager at IBM on the Ceph team, and sort of the last big thing I did technically was build the stretch mode implementation. I was supposed to be joined today by Sam Just, who was the first Rados tech lead, and many of you may also know from his work on Crimson and other stuff, but unfortunately had a family thing come up, so he helped me prepare a lot of this presentation, but you're just going to hear me talking about things directly. So first, why do we do reviews at all? We do reviews for a lot of reasons. The first one is we want to make sure that the code that goes into Ceph is correct. Bugs are bad, and sometimes there are bugs in newly submitted code because you messed up your loop, and tests can catch it, but getting tests with 100% coverage is hard. Or maybe we have tests that will catch it, but it won't show up for a week, or we don't have tests that will catch it. So the first level is just making sure that the code works at all. We really, really don't want to lose people's data. There are a lot of software systems where if something goes wrong, you just restart it and it's fine. We store data, you can't restart the data store. It's a bummer. The second thing, though, sort of adjacent to that, is that Ceph is a big, complicated project. We have lots of invariants around the code base, and sometimes people who are building new features run into those invariants but don't know about it. If you are changing the way scrub works inside of the OSD, you also need to take care that you're following the rules to make sure you coordinate with ongoing writes, and various kinds of wait lists for different recoveries and things. And if you miss any of those, and they're not always very obvious, because it's happening over in this part of the code base and you're making a change here, and there's just this invisible dependency we're not very good at talking about, that's a problem. So we have more experienced people review code in those places to make sure those invariants come up and can be addressed by the author. Next, even if the code is not buggy, we need to make sure that it fits. It needs to work correctly with the rest of the project. It needs to make sense as a thing within Ceph. And so maybe there's this great new feature that someone added that is good for users, but it uses the "yes, I really mean it" flag for the default mode. And and then if you don't do "yes, I really mean it," then terrible things happen. We got to make sure that it just follows the rules of the code base. And finally, as sort of a summation of all the problems, is one of the hardest things we do in Ceph. We build distributed systems, all kinds of distributed algorithms and data structures, but even harder than designing those is making sure that they work together when you upgrade the software, and that your distributed algorithms work with two different versions of software that might be running at the same time. So lots of people build great features or bug fixes on the first try, but then we say, oh, you haven't addressed the upgrade cases yet. Here's where you need to go look to start doing that. Next, even once all the correctness stuff is done, we need to be able to support the code. There are a lot of people who work full-time on Ceph, but sometimes you quit your job. We have a lot of people. We're an open source project. We get requests from people who don't work full-time on Ceph and want to integrate us into their system, and that's great. We love working with all the systems out there. But if you go away, we need to make sure that we can support it. So we do that in a couple ways. One, by having someone else read the code and make sure it works, we know that it is possible for someone to understand the code. And second, we make sure that in addition to the raw code drop, we have the stuff needed to keep maintaining it going forward. If you build a feature in Ceph and you don't test it, it probably doesn't work. If you build a feature in Ceph and you test it, but it's not in the in our Teuthology test suite and running in our CP lab, it'll probably stop working. So we make sure that as pull requests come in, that they include the tests necessary to keep that feature alive and well, and that there's documentation both for users and developers on how to use it and how to keep it alive and well. Next, we want to be the best we can. Ceph is an incredibly complicated system. I've been working on it for 15 years, and ever since the first time we had a user, everything we hear from users is it's complicated to run. Like if you run OpenStack, then you deploy Ceph, I hear it's great. But anyone whose bar isn't, it needs to be easier than OpenStack 10 years ago, finds Ceph difficult. So we want to try and minimize complexity wherever we can. And so sometimes having a new person look at it from the completed solution point of view gives us an opportunity to say, oh, now that we know all the touch points, like here's a much simpler solution to the problem that's less lines of code, or that is a better UI for users, or just is in some way simpler and easier to reason about, which means that it's easier to keep it bug-free and safe going forward. It's also important that the code match the design of the system around it, and that it fits in, from a user perspective, and that the controls for users are understandable. We've got a lot of features in Ceph where we built a system and there was this one little bug, so we added this one little flag for if you're in this case that a power user knows to turn on, but no one else does. And so we have these really weird user interfaces and experiences, and we want to both make them better. We want to make them better, but we especially want to not make them worse, and we want the new commands to fit into the same paradigms and use the same sorts of flags to mean the same sorts of things. And then finally, we want to build and maintain a community around the source code. It's not supposed to be secret. Obviously, it's not. It's open source. But code reviews mean that someone else in the community understands the code, that they are available to help random developers or users deal with issues that come up with it, that just anyone understands it at all if the original author leaves. Secondly, we get new contributors to the project, and we want to teach them about the Ceph code base and the standards and everything that we use to work together smoothly. And so reviews help introduce new community members to that space and the sorts of problems they need to think about and the constraints they're operating under when they build solutions. So I'm going to talk about the reviewer role first because I've been doing that longer. Let's say you have some downtime and feel like doing a review, so you pick something at random, or you work at a company and you work for me and I say you need to go review this PR. You got a couple of goals when you're looking at a pull request as a reviewer. First of all, someone thought the code was useful and important to merge in. It was a bug fix or it added a new feature. And we like bug fixes. We like to not have bugs in our software. And we like new features because, it means that the software is better for someone. So we want to get those new bug fixes and features merged into the project. But at the same time, we need to keep buggy or bad code out. Very rarely we'll get a feature request from someone where they do the work, but we look at it and it's just like, ooh, for some reason that's a problem. It adds this cool new thing for you, but no one else is going to be able to use it for this reason. And we decide that there's just no way it's in there. So when you're a reviewer, you are a gate. You're making sure that it's good enough to get in. But it's important to remember your goal is to be a friendly gate. You want to get it in. And you are working with the person who submitted the code to make sure that it is ready to go in and to help them get to reach that space. So you have a few responsibilities. Well, you have many responsibilities. First of all, we need to make sure that the goal of the pull request is clear. That it is possible for, especially you, but for anyone to understand what's going on, and that the code and the commits make sense. And in 5 years when there's a bug with the way the system interacts with some other system, it's possible to go learn what they did and why and to resolve it, rather than just being something in between the OSD and the client is broken and I don't know who's right or how to fix it. You need to be able to understand all the sides of the problem, and frequently that means going and looking at doing Git archaeology or looking at documentation. Second, we need to ensure that the PR meets the project supportability needs, like we talked about. That's one of the things that review gets us. Make sure that there's tests and that there's documentation. A surprisingly big one is that we actually match the coding style. If you work on a big project, you want all the code to, we have a variety of coding styles depending on the era the Ceph code came from, but it's a constrained variety, and we're marching towards unification, and we want to keep marching in a direction that means that you can drop into any random piece of the Ceph code and at least be able to understand that, oh, this is a constant, this is a variable, because otherwise everything's more expensive. Excuse me. We need to make sure that the commits and this one is challenging for people sometimes who aren't used to working with Git, but that or the kernel, but that the commits make understanding the history clear. I'll do some case studies at the end, but it's just you want to understanding a one-line patch is very, very easy. Understanding 10 one-line patches in one commit is really, really hard. So we want to make sure that the commits are understandable on their own, and that they tell a story within the context of the pull request that will both guide you, the reviewer, through, and that will guide future developers who are doing Git archaeology through, or people who are building new enhancements on top of it. That they can look at the commits, and that lays out a roadmap for the story of the feature and how the feature works. That gives them a space to start from. And finally, you need to respect their submitter's time. A lot of times we'll see one thing you don't want to see is someone submits a PR and it goes through a couple rounds of review and they make an algorithmic change or change the data structure, and it goes through testing and it all looks good, and then another reviewer comes in and is like, oh, hey, have you considered using a set instead of a map here? I think you should do that before it goes in. Maybe that's a great choice and a really important thing, but if that's true, you need to articulate why. And if not, the submitter's dumped a bunch of time into this, don't make them jump through hoops just because you like the way it looks a little better as someone who hasn't been involved in the process already. Because they're volunteering, or their company's volunteering their time to make Ceph better, or you work on a team together and you don't want to waste that time. And finally, you are in the Ceph community and the contributors in the Ceph community, and it may be their first time in the Ceph community. You are representing the Ceph community to that submitter. Be kind to them. Don't tell them they did something wrong. Say, I think there's this thing you've forgotten about, and give them links and ways to improve. It's incredibly important to give everyone as good an experience as we can when we're doing reviews. Okay, so that's sort of your responsibility, but some ways to go about this. First of all, address the overall goals and approach first as a reviewer. The important part, you're going to need to deal with syntax, and if the syntax is so confused, or the way the code is structured is so confusing, you can't understand the big picture, you got to tell the reviewer that and be like, here's our coding style, please follow these guidelines, help me out. But apart from something like that, you want to look at the design at the beginning and make sure that it makes sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, then there's no point in reviewing the rest of it, and the submitter has a lot of work to do that will change all the rest of it. So does design make sense? Is the bug fix actually is there actually a bug that they're changing, or are they changing behavior because they didn't like it, but it will break something else? In which case we need to do something more complicated. Are they building a new feature and that we want it in? And sometimes just helping them, sometimes like I was talking about telling a story earlier, sometimes it's hard to tell this if stuff comes out in the wrong order, or they give you one 15,000 line commit. It's hard to work with. So you may need to tell them look, I would love to help you. Here's what I need you to do so that I can look at this project, and we can start working through it together. Next, after you've made sure that it sort of works at a high level, look at the structure and the design. Do the changes within the project come in the right place? You want to build data structures and then higher level algorithms off of the data structures, or the new new members you've introduced to a data structure. Do the interfaces make sense? Are they going to be extensible in the future as we need to make changes? Do they respect the appropriate abstraction interfaces? A lot of the old Ceph code does not. And if you work in the OSD, you can be really grateful that Sam and Josh spent a year and a half re-architecting the whole OSD in 2012 or 2013 to make it understandable and to minimize. There's still so many. Wow, I'm losing words. I talked earlier about the invariants and them cutting across. There's still so many invariants in the OSD, but they are way better contained than they used to be. In the MDS, a lot of the MDS is maintained, but if you end up in the file capabilities in the locker code, it just goes everywhere. So we always want to make it better, and we definitely don't want to make it worse. And do changes duplicate things? Sometimes it's okay to have the same logic twice. but a lot of the times it's not. So, like if they're copying code from one place and putting it into another, do they need to start introducing functions and calling them from both places? And then finally, be more local. Will it all make sense to future readers? Does the code have the documentation it needs? Because a lot of times you write like sort of idea documentation at the beginning, and then you do the implementation, but then you need to write the real documentation at the end now that you actually have worked through all the problems and know what it is. So did that get done? Excuse me. Are there tests that make sure that the PR both works now and will continue to work in the future? If it doesn't, that needs to get done. Do the changes fit in with the surrounding code and follow the conventions of the source files and modules it's in? And does it meet our standards and follow our idioms? And I got that star there because if it's like really, really doesn't follow our idioms or meet our coding standards, you may need to tell them this up front. But usually it's like little things. You can just tell them at the end, like, oh, we don't strictly require an 80-line or an 80-character code line, but we really try to stick there, and 175 is way too long. Like just put a line break in here somewhere, things like that. So that's sort of the role of the reviewer within our process and what we expect. We are slightly less than halfway through. Any questions so far? Feel free to raise your hand at some point if you've got stuff. Okay, the submitter role. You are, already here, so probably you have some idea or have seen these, but this is what we expect from submitters. First of all, you have some goals. You want to fix bugs or build new features or something, and you want them to get merged. If it doesn't get merged, maybe you're working at a site where you have deployments that need this fixed, and so it's okay if it just runs on your system, but mostly you want it to be available to the world. It's good for your future career. It's good for your company within our community. It's good for the community as a whole. And generally speaking, like how much can vary, but you want to integrate yourself at some level and your contributions in the community, because that way, if you have a bug fix for just you and you add tests, those tests will run in the upstream lab. And you'll know that when you upgrade that it still works. And you don't need to check if you need to repatch it in your deployment. And you end up in the release cycle and documentation. But you do have some responsibilities as a submitter. You need to make your submission as easy to review as possible. Reviews can take a lot of time from skilled and important central developers, and you want to minimize that time both to be polite and also so that they actually can take the time to review it and get it in. Don't dump things over the wall. Coming to Cephlicon and talking about something you want to do can, if you have some work is great. We hold, there's monthly Ceph developer meetings and the most everyday stand-ups and the Ceph developer mailing list. If you've got a big thing coming in, you want to start talking about it. I have this problem. I'm considering this solution. Here's does this make sense? Oh, hey, great. I've implemented some of it. Here's the branch if you want to check it out. We're trying it out now, and it solved our immediate need, but we're not sure it's going to work in another environment, so I'm doing some stuff. It made, if you drop 10,000 lines off and just are hey, can someone review this? It's going to be hard for people to find the time, because that a 10,000 PR or a 10,000 line PR takes time to review, and someone needs to schedule that. So try and prepare the ground so that people are maybe already invested in it and can have an easier time justifying the carve out. Next, when you're doing a submission, again, as with the reviewer, making sure your goals and designs should be obvious. You want to walk reviewers through a story because it minimizes the amount of time they need to spend on it. It makes it easier to tell that it's correct, which is good for you. Maybe you'll find bugs along the way that you resolve by doing this, and it's good for the reviewers, and it's good for everyone in the future who needs to follow how this worked. So you want to structure your commit, send the pull request to make that as easy as possible. For large or complex PRs, you want to, in the description, talk about what it does and how to review it. Sometimes you want to say, this commit is the big one, or here's the data structure to start with, or the documentation to read, and then go on from there. Because sometimes, it makes it easier. When you add interfaces or header files, you need to talk about, what they're for, and their relationships to other things, and just keep changes simple. Complexity makes everything harder, so we want things to be simple. But that doesn't just mean in the implementation, like it also means just literally the commits themselves. When we get to, well, I don't have examples in the presentation, but from the case studies I have, if you go look at any of them, you'll see that, you know, the median commit size is something under 10 lines of code. Because anytime you do a big work, you make a lot of little changes to existing structures, and then you do the big thing. So we'll get to it, but you know, if you're like, you know, working along and you find a bug, you're like, okay, let me fix this bug, and then just make a commit right there. Use a graphical git thing, or you know, git-i, and select that one line and be like, this is a commit. It fixes this bug. Don't merge it into other things. On that theme, commit messages should say what the commit is and why it's there. You don't want, I mean, sometimes they get longer. You don't normally want them to be too long, but you know, it needs to like say what it is and why. If you fix a bug, it should have a fixes line that refers to the redmine tracker, and then you know, explain why this fixes the bug. It might need to be in other places too, but like that makes it super easy for anyone looking at the patches, doing a review. It's super easy for people who need to do backports, or which may be really important to you if you're submitting a fix. It's going to go into main, but you may be on 2 releases ago, and you want that backport to be there. You want that change to be as easy to review as possible, just everywhere it shows up, as easy to understand in the future if someone needs to revisit the bug and be like, well, we thought we fixed this 2 years ago. Here's the explanation. Because like we go back to stuff like this a lot, and then, well, this last line is sort of saying its own thing. Do one thing at a time. If you're like making big changes to a lot of code, but there's no logical change, just put it in its own commit and say that. It's much easier to review. Like depending on the size, a lot of times you just like as a reviewer just skim it and you like literally run a diff as a reviewer and like, yep, don't need to look at this. Whereas if it's mixed in with other things, you have to go through all the lines and be like, is this the same line? Is this the same line? Is this the same line? Oh, this isn't the same line. Why is this a different line? So just the smallest possible change all at once. Or sorry, the smallest logical change all at the same time. So those are sort of the responsibilities on both sides. Now let's talk about communicating. It's really easy to be mean to each other in reviews, and we don't want that. So be kind. You are both there trying to make Ceph better in some way. So respect that. Like, we're all human beings. We're all interested in this project and in it being awesome. Like, you're both just to be there as a reviewer or submitter. You've invested a lot of time already and some effort. So assume good intent. When you're doing a review or just commenting or following along, ask questions that are appropriate to the PR's progress. If you're asked to make some changes, make changes that are appropriate to where the PR is. And ask questions about options more than you dictate changes. It's really easy to be like, oh, you're like doing lookups 7 times in this map, or every loop in this map. Why don't you, you have to change it to make an iterator. And you know, it may be totally right to do that. Like most of the time, you should be using an iterator instead of doing repeated lookups in a map. But ask is there a reason not to do this? And then, let the submitter take the hint. Or, maybe you missed something and there's a real reason not to. And then use friendly and inclusive language. Like reviewers are asking submitters to change work they've already invested in, certainly intellectually, quite possibly emotionally. Most people care about their output and it being, and they're attached to it. So you want to make it as easy for them as possible. Use we statements. Say things about like you are collaborating with them to make stuff better. So this is something like we need to do this. Like there's an invariant, and we need to maintain that invariant. So maybe we could do that in this way instead of saying, oh, you forgot this invariant. Like they may have no way of knowing that invariant existed, never heard about it. Nothing in the code you're in refers to it. So just be like, tell them it's there and suggest how to resolve it. If there's code style issues. Have some documentation about why. We have a coding style guide. It refers to the Google style guide with some changes. Occasionally we do change it if people think that we ought to. It's our biggest resistance to changing it is just that it's easy to get in bike shedding, but we do change it, not infrequently if we really have to. And you don't want to get into a pissing match where you're just like, you have to do it this way because I said so. That's not helpful. Just say, like, our code style guidelines say this. So please make this change in this way. And when you think that you spot a problem, well, first of all, you may not, in fact, be correct. But secondly, it may be that there's a reason that it looks the way it does. So ask why choices were made instead of saying they need to be different. As the submitter, you're going to be making changes in response to review. Keep that PR readable and reviewable. The general pattern that I follow is I submit a PR, I start getting feedback, and so I push fix up commits that say, fix up, and it'll be like fix up this commit is the header line. The rest of the commit message will be like, make this change for whatever reason, and it might just be someone asked, or it might be like, this reason that they gave me that I needed to adjust it for. And then push that to the GitHub PR, and it shows up on GitHub as a later change after the review comments. And then once the reviewers are like signing off on it, you can go back, and it's really easy to just rebase, merge those fix-ups into the starter commits, and do a diff to make sure you haven't messed up. And that's good because the future code archaeologist has a nice clean Git history to read to understand the commits and why they were made. But along the way, you can tell that, okay, here's this fix-up commit that fixes the thing I asked them to change as a reviewer. You don't want to give someone a 1,000-line PR to review, have them make comments on 600 lines of it, and then make it impossible for them to tell which comments have been changed and which things they still need to review because that history is gone. When you're collaborating on a PR, strive not to surprise your counterpart. If you are looking at it and you're like, ooh, there's some code style issues we're going to need to deal with in the future, don't hold on to that until the end and say, now you need to change all your code style. Say, here's our coding guide, here's some problems that you're going to need to address, but let's talk about the design right now. If you're a submitter, sometimes people want early feedback, and that's great, but present it in a way that's good. If you submit a PR and say hey, can you guys check this out, and then someone spends 2 hours reviewing it, and you're like, oh, I'm re-implementing, I'm redoing the whole design, why did they spend 2 hours reviewing it? So make it clear what stage a PR is in if you don't think it's ready to go. And don't cast people for new designs at the end of a review process unless it's really, really important. If they've invested the time in polishing it to meet all the standards and things, it takes time, it takes effort, and then having to go back and throw it all away feels bad, and is a waste of our collective output. So don't do that. I think we got this, yeah. And submitters communicate in GitHub as you push code. If you look at one of my PRs that we're going to use as a sample, you'll see a lot of pushes from me, and basically all of them are followed by a comment that's like, I have now done these things as we discussed somewhere. And that makes clear why there was a push and what the changes are, and if there's new things to review, it says please go look at this part of it. Okay, so that's sort of the straightforward, here's do's and don'ts and things to do, let's communicate. I've got some PRs now to talk about as case studies. Unfortunately, I don't have the commit list because it's a lot of text, but we can, if you want, here's the links, you can go look at them and some points to consider as you do so. So this is one of Sam's PRs to improve replica reads. Ceph for a long time has allowed you to set config options in the client to read from replicas. The early implementations restricted it to snapshotted objects, I think, and were for doing local reads on base images of RBD clones. There were later implementations to enable you to do it on live objects, and the reason that was a big deal was because it meant that replicas needed to track some state about updates in flight to make sure that we weren't returning stale I/O or stale data, which we strive for consistency. This is very important. So that was, I don't know, 3 years ago or something that got done. But there was a problem that we ran into, which is that if objects are new enough, we can't serve the read zone locally because we don't know for sure that it's up to date or not. and the bound for recent enough was not getting moved very aggressively if PGs weren't getting updated very often. So Sam wrote some code to make it much faster, which meant that we were much more likely to get the replica read on hot data, or like hot data in an otherwise idle system. And if you look at his commit list, you'll see some things. I want to say this was like an 800-line PR, but I might be misremembering which one it is. And the median length of a commit on this PR was like 9 lines. I actually don't remember the numbers. There were 15 or 20 commits. Most of them were 9 lines. 2 were 50, and 1 was very large. So the initial commits fix cosmetic issues and remove stuff that he discovered along the way that should just be gone for whatever reason. I don't think he had to fix he spotted and fixed any bugs here, but there were like some functions that he was just like, oh, this function is dead. Remove this function because I don't want to have to think about it anymore in the future, and especially right now. And if you look at PRs from our more experienced developers, you'll see a lot of that. Like the opening of the PR is just like, tidy up this thing, remove this dead variable, fix this little bug that you encounter along the way doing big architectural changes. Next, this is one of the deeper, older parts of the code. So he added a bunch of context or a bunch of comments, and he made the names of certain variables and outputs make more sense in relationship to each other because some of them had misleading names that would have made it easy to get confused. And that serves 2 purposes. It's better going forward, and it introduces you, the reviewer, to what the important thing is here and what the rules around it are. And then he does the actual change that this whole thing was for, which is to make sure that the committed to bounds are much tighter. And then adds tests, because now it's done, so we can have tests to finish it. In that review process, some mistakes are caught, but because it was set up easily, most of it was about, is this the right design choice, and do we want to implement this way or not? This was a very detail-oriented PR. A lot of people within the Ceph, even the Rados development team, would not have known ahead of time what was going on, but he set it up to educate you as you go and to tell the story, which gives you all the information you need to make sense out of it. Another PR from Sam, which Neha referenced in the keynote this morning, Crush multi-step retry. So Crush has historically had, Crush is a weird system, and we had one thing that was turning out to be a weakness, especially coming up from our product managers at IBM, where they really wanted to be able to have erasure codes where you had more than one part on the same host or in the same rack without having too many. And so we needed to make Crush changes to do that in a reliable way. So this was mostly in the Crush code, which is not well parented right now. Sage was the Crush guy. He got reviews from people when he made changes to it, but not a lot of other people have spent time in it. So Sam made these changes. He got some reviews, and he came to me and was like, Greg, I need you to go make sure this is right because I need someone else who has a chance of understanding the Crush code to tell me I've done it wrong or not. So I came and looked at this, and the first thing I said was, Sam, I can't tell what you tried to do. Where's the documentation? And it turned out it wasn't there. It was the way it was arranged, it was hard for me to find. So he made it a little easier to find, and he told me where it was. And then once I had that documentation, I started actually doing the review. If you look at this PR, you'll see that I think my first review, I told him I didn't finish it in the header, but I had 5 or 6 comments, and all but one of them was a question. And some of them were statements in the form of questions shouldn't this be? But a lot of those were genuinely wait, have I missed something here? And once he gave me that documentation, we went straight to the details of the PR because he'd laid it out otherwise in a way that made sense. I want to call out a couple of things here, and I'm going to do them in the reverse order. First of all, this was a PR where looking at the actual code that was submitted, was, I mean, it wasn't trivial, but it wasn't what spent time on. The big thing I did in this PR was go read the crush files he was modifying and make sure that I understood them. And I used this code as a scaffold to dig into the important data structures, and it's like an order of learning about it. But mostly what I did was read existing code that he wasn't touching to make sure that I understand the rules and the invariants and the interfaces, and then that his changes made sense inside of that. And then the other thing is that, generally speaking, if you're doing a review, you want to review everything, but sometimes you get called in to be like, hey, like we're making this multi-component change. I need you to review the Ceph part. I need you to review the RVD changes. I need you, whatever. And it's important to be explicit about what you have and have not reviewed. And I was very clear about that in my reviews. So, if you're looking at only part of the thing, like make that very clear. If you want to get comments out because you spent an hour and a half reviewing, and it's the end of your day, and you want to be able to look at it before you get online tomorrow, say like, this is how far I got, and here's what I found, and then come back to it when in the future. And wow, I am just about out of time. What is our schedule here? I'm not sure if we have another session. No, okay, it's lunch. I can go a few minutes over then. Great. So this was the last big thing I did before I switched into management. I wrote stretch mode. So I went through, like I structured the PR like we talked about. I made the little changes. There were actually sort of two mini PRs inside it. Well, they were both very large, but two sort of stories inside of this one. One was making the changes to the monitor that changed the way that we did elections to support this. And then the other one was actually doing the stretch mode stuff in the OSD. And this was something where I knew a lot of it, but it touched, again, deep inside the OSD and the peering code. And I understand a lot of the algorithms there, but the code itself I'm middlingly familiar with. So Sam looked at this for me, because I was like, Sam, I need the OSD peering guy. And he was like, oh, you have this critical issue. We are not following the stretch mode, the new stretch mode requirements in this function that we use to go out and find our previous acting sets. And he actually was like, okay, well, I have the fix for this. Here's how you do this. He gave me a patch. And sometimes, if you're a submitter, someone will do that for you because you've sparked their interest or you've done enough other work that they're like, okay, it's worth investing in you this time to fix this problem for you. So he gave me that patch, or actually he gave it to me in the form of a branch which had his patch. I pulled it in, I adjusted it into my PR, and then I was like, okay, this PR has now changed in this way. I pushed an update which adopts Sam's changes and these other things. So here's for new reviewers, or follow-on reviews or people who are in progress. Here's the change that was made. Here's why it was made. Here's the parts I still need people to look at. And apart from that, because all the monitor code I was the expert in, there were a lot of review comments on whether the user experience was right. Because it was a big change to the system. It was a big new feature. It's kind of complicated, and people had opinions. And you'll see that, in fact, in that review, someone was like, should we be able to turn off stretch mode? And I was like, well, maybe, but here's why I haven't done it yet. And I now forget, Junior, if it was in Squid or is going into Tentacle. But, that's coming up now because it was a thing that people certainly did want in the future, and we identified and decided not to do it then, but future work. And that is it. So thanks very much for coming by. We have lunch now, so feel free to go get lunch or to come down and chat with me or ask questions in front of everyone.